The first time I learned that love and betrayal can wear the same face was on an evening when the city lights of Denver, Colorado glowed like scattered diamonds against the mountains. The crisp air carried a promise of celebration, one that seemed destined to finally close the aching distance between me and the people I once called my own. Quick reminder, most of you aren't subscribed. If you enjoy this, hit subscribe and like now, then let's get back to the story. For 34 years, I had carried them on my shoulders, sometimes willingly, sometimes because I'd been taught that family meant sacrifice without conditions. I had spent countless nights building my marketing agency from nothing but raw determination and coffee-stained sketches, believing every win might finally earn their respect. And now, after years of being overlooked, my father's voice on the phone was warm, almost tender. "Come early, Emily," he said. "We're honoring you tonight. We want to celebrate properly." It was the kind of invitation I had dreamed of since childhood, a simple acknowledgement that I mattered. My heart skipped, a hopeful ache rising in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, the people who had so easily turned my success into their safety net would finally see me as more than a walking wallet. I dressed as if stepping into the life I'd longed for. A sleek black dress that caught the soft light, a touch of lipstick the color of quiet defiance. As I drove toward the sprawling mountainside resort, every twist of the road whispered possibility. The night air smelled of pine and distant wood smoke. Even the stars seemed to hum with promise. But doubt has a way of slipping through even the thickest hope. My brother, Marcus, had been fishing for details about my recent promotion, his texts filled with not-so-subtle hints about the size of my new bonus. My mother, Linda, had mentioned needing a new car sometime soon, her tone as casual as someone asking for a glass of water. Even my grandmother, gentle Margaret, had called about a mysteriously overdue phone bill. Their voices echoed in my memory like a warning I didn't want to hear. Still, I pushed the unease aside. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was for me. The resort's ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers, the soft murmur of conversation rising like music. I inhaled the scent of polished wood and expensive wine as a waiter approached with a silver tray of name tags. He smiled, handed me one, and drifted away before I even looked down. 2 words stared back, black letters etched like a bruise. Limited guest. My stomach tightened. The letters felt like a slap. Limited guest. At my own celebration. I scanned the room, searching for a familiar face. My mother stood near the head table, her laughter bright and brittle. My father, Richard, was deep in conversation with colleagues, his back half turned. Marcus lounged at the bar, a sly grin curling his lips as our eyes met. He sauntered over, the clink of ice in his glass punctuating his words. "No dinner for you," he whispered with a smirk. "Just drinks. House rules for limited guests." My mother caught my eye then, and, like a cue in a cruel play, burst into a peal of laughter so sharp it silenced the guests around her for a breath. A few nearby strangers chuckled uncertainly, not sure if they were meant to join in. The room tilted, the glittering chandeliers blurring into a haze. The celebration I had allowed myself to believe in dissolved into something colder, uglier. They hadn't invited me to honor me. They had invited me to humiliate me. I felt the old, familiar ache of being the family's provider, the silent financier whose worth was measured in wire transfers and last-minute rescues. Years of quietly paying Marcus's rent when he lost his job again, of covering Mom's medical bills, of wiring Dad money for vague business ventures, all while building my agency from scratch. $50,000 gone in 3 years, money I told myself was the price of belonging. I remembered the accountant's warning, "You're enabling them, Emily," and how I had smiled through the sting of truth. I remembered every text from Marcus about emergencies that turned out to be gaming consoles or weekend getaways. Every time Mom called it self-care, when she booked another luxury spa trip with my money. Every time Dad's so-called investments looked suspiciously like golf vacations. And now, this. A name tag that reduced me to an afterthought at my own supposed celebration. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Something steadier, colder settled in my chest. I reached for my phone, my hand perfectly still, and opened the banking app tied to the company account they treated like an open wallet. My thumb hovered for only a heartbeat before I tapped Deactivate Secondary Access. A small confirmation popped up. Access revoked. I slipped the phone back into my clutch, my face as unreadable as the mountain night beyond those glittering windows. Around me, laughter swelled and glasses clinked. They had no idea that with one quiet motion, the financial lifeline they'd relied on for years had just vanished. 10 minutes passed, maybe 15. Marcus's phone buzzed first. His grin faltered as his eyes flicked to the screen. My mother's laughter died mid-sentence when her own phone lit up. She grabbed my father's arm, whispering sharply as he pulled out his phone and read. Their faces drained of color in unison, a slow, silent unraveling. My father's gaze finally found me, sharp as cut glass. He crossed the room with a deliberate calm that failed to hide the edge in his voice. Emily, he said, holding up his phone. What is this? I lifted my glass of water, my tone even. Check your notifications. My mother's eyes blazed. You're being dramatic, she hissed. Marcus's voice cracked with sudden panic. You can't just cut us off like that. I have debts. I rose smoothly, smoothing the hem of my dress. Thank you for the drinks, I said, and walked toward the exit without a backward glance. The chandeliers still sparkled behind me, but their light felt distant, as though it belonged to another world, one I had just stepped away from for good. The Denver night wrapped around me like a quiet witness as I stepped into the cold, mountain-scented air. The sharp bite of the breeze felt cleaner than anything inside that glittering ballroom. I walked across the parking lot with measured steps, the sound of my heels against the asphalt a steady drumbeat of resolve. For years I had let them chip away at me with polite smiles and subtle guilt. Tonight, the weight slid off my shoulders with every step toward my car. I drove through the city's sleeping streets, the lights of downtown fading in the rearview mirror like fading memories. My apartment waited on the edge of Capitol Hill, a small 2-bedroom space that smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. My own little sanctuary, carefully carved out of late nights and endless ambition. By the time I turned the key and stepped inside, the silence greeted me like an old friend. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't even pour a drink. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the couch, phone in hand, and watched the digital storm I had just unleashed begin to brew. The family account, my account, was now locked, and with it the hidden pipeline that had kept their lives cushioned. Within 30 minutes, my phone buzzed. The first call was from Dad. I let it ring. Then Marcus. Then Mom. One after another, their names lit up my screen, a flashing carousel of urgency. I stared at it, feeling nothing but the steady rhythm of my own breath. When the ringing finally stopped, the silence felt almost ceremonial. But silence never lasts long in my family. 3 days later, they arrived unannounced. It was a gray morning when the knock came. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the apartment like a warning. I set down my coffee and opened the door to find all 3 of them standing there. Dad, Mom, and Marcus. Their faces were tight with anger and something close to desperation. Emily, we need to talk, Dad said without greeting, stepping inside before I could answer. I folded my arms, leaning against the doorway as Mom swept in behind him, her perfume, expensive and cloying, filling the room. Marcus trailed last, his shoulders hunched, a scowl fixed across his face. You've gone too far, Dad began, pacing near the couch. Cutting us off like that? At your own celebration? I met his gaze, my voice even. You invited me there to humiliate me. I simply returned the favor, Mom bristled, her eyes flashing. That name tag was a joke, Emily, a harmless joke. You didn't have to ruin everything. I shook my head slowly. A joke? That was your idea of honoring me? Marcus shifted his weight, his usual bravado replaced by something more fragile. You've screwed me over, he said, his voice low and trembling. I needed that account. My brows lifted. For what exactly? The rent I already paid, or the extra cash you pulled without asking? His eyes darted away. I stepped closer, my patience thinning. I covered Mom's medical bills, $3,000. Dad's so-called car repairs. Marcus, I sent you $5,000 for your emergency. What did you do with the rest? He swallowed hard, jaw tight. It's not like that, he muttered. Then what is it? I demanded. Dad cut in sharply. Stop interrogating him. We're family. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Family doesn't treat me like an ATM. Mom's face twisted, her voice rising. We raised you, Emily. We gave you everything. You owe us. The audacity landed like a slap. Owe you? I said, my voice steady but fierce. I've given you over $50,000 in 3 years. What have I received in return? A limited guest tag and your laughter. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Words tumbled out of him, rushed and shaky. It wasn't just rent. I used some of the money for investments, stocks, crypto. The admission hit me like a sudden gust of icy wind, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed the gnawing suspicion I'd carried for months. You took my company's money to gamble? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I thought I'd make it back. Pay you back. My heart pounded with a mix of fury and clarity. All those nights I'd believed he was drowning, not scheming. All those sacrifices I made because I thought he needed me. You lied to me, I said, each word sharp as a blade. All of you did. Mom opened her mouth, but I cut her off. No more money. No more favors. No more excuses. Dad's face darkened. You'll regret this, he said coldly. We're your family. I moved to the door and pulled it open, the morning light spilling across the hardwood floor. Family respects each other, I said. You never did. They hesitated, their anger faltering into something else. Unease, maybe even fear. Marcus muttered something I couldn't catch. Mom's glare softened, then hardened again. Dad walked out last, his silence heavier than any threat. The door clicked shut behind them with a sound that felt final. For the first time in years, my apartment truly belonged to me. The walls, once a backdrop to endless late-night calls and silent resentments, now held a different kind of quiet, one that felt like freedom. But my family wasn't done with me yet. Days turned into weeks, and the silence that followed felt less like peace and more like a storm gathering strength. It came first as whispers through mutual friends, small comments about how I had changed, how I had abandoned the people who raised me. I ignored them, focusing instead on my agency, which was thriving now that I no longer funneled my earnings into their bottomless needs. Then the real blow came. My phone buzzed one evening while I was finalizing a client proposal. A notification from social media flashed across the screen. Marcus had posted a status for everyone to see. Some people get a little success and forget where they came from. Selfish and ungrateful, he tagged me. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the comments. Mom had shared the post with a single crying emoji and the words, "So disappointed." Dad had added his own comment beneath it. Never thought my own daughter would betray us. The likes and reactions piled up. Neighbors, distant cousins, old school friends, all drawn to the spectacle. Some added their own digs, feeding on the drama. I sat frozen, my name dragged through the mud by the very people who had bled me dry. When I opened Twitter, now rebranded as X, the betrayal deepened. Marcus had posted again, calling me a greedy sellout who abandoned her family. Mom had retweeted it. Dad hadn't posted, but his likes on Marcus's tweets were enough to make his allegiance clear. My stomach churned. Anger and hurt collided like storm clouds. Then my phone rang. It was Monica, my closest friend and the one person who had seen through my family's games from the start. Her voice crackled with urgency. "Emily, check your email. A client just tipped me off. Marcus has been talking to one of your competitors." The words landed like a stone in my gut. I opened my inbox with trembling fingers. A colleague had forwarded a message. Marcus had contacted a rival marketing agency, offering insider details about my upcoming campaign, client lists, strategies, anything to sabotage me. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was war. For a long moment, I just stared at the email, the words blurring like smoke on the screen. The betrayal was almost too calculated to process. My own brother selling me out to competitors, handing over months of creative work I had fought to protect. Anger came first, swift and scalding, but beneath it a heavier ache settled in my chest. The quiet grief of realizing that blood ties had become a weapon pointed straight at me. Monica stayed on the line, her voice steady while mine threatened to crack. "Emily," she said firmly, "this isn't just family drama anymore. This is your business. You need to protect yourself, legally." Her words pulled me back from the spiral. She was right. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about everything I'd built from the ground up. Years of late nights, of pitching to clients who barely knew my name, of turning sketches into campaigns that paid for every brick of my independence. I couldn't let Marcus burn it down out of spite. I straightened in my chair, my fingers already moving across the keyboard. First, I logged into my agency's server and changed every password: email, client portals, project management tools, locking down every corner of the digital space I'd created. I restricted access to sensitive files, flagged anything Marcus might have seen, and backed up everything to a private drive. Monica's voice softened. "You're doing the right thing. But Emily, you also need a paper trail, screenshots, emails, every post they've made about you. Save it." I opened each social media platform and began the slow, deliberate work of gathering evidence. Marcus's Facebook post, Mom's crying emoji share, Dad's comment dripping with quiet condemnation. I captured them all. On X, Marcus's tweets called me a greedy sellout, his words sharpened to wound. Mom had gleefully retweeted, her bio still boasting about being a proud mother, a bitter irony I refused to miss. Dad's likes were silent endorsements, but proof all the same. The more I documented, the steadier my breathing became. Each screenshot was a brick in the wall I would build to protect myself. When the evidence folder was full, I opened my contacts and called Dana Pierce, the attorney who had helped me draft my first big client contracts. It was after 9, but she answered on the second ring. "Emily?" Donna's voice was clear and alert, as though she had been expecting a call like this. "I need your help," I said, my tone measured but urgent. I explained everything: the money, the limited guest humiliation, the sudden public attacks, and finally, Marcus's attempt to leak my proprietary campaign. Dana didn't interrupt. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "This isn't just defamation," she said. "It's potentially a breach of confidentiality, maybe even corporate espionage. We'll start with a cease and desist and prepare for the possibility of a lawsuit. Document everything: dates, times, messages. And Emily, don't contact them directly about this. Not yet." The word lawsuit settled into the room like a cold, certain truth. When I hung up, the night outside my window had deepened. Denver's skyline glittered like a handful of scattered coins, but to me it looked different now, sharper, less forgiving. I closed my laptop and sat back, my heart beating with a mix of fear and resolve. My family hadn't just crossed a line, they'd set it on fire. The following days were a blur of quiet preparation. I met with Dana in her office, a sleek space lined with legal books and the faint scent of polished wood. We reviewed my evidence, every screenshot, every forwarded email. She drafted a letter that was both clinical and devastating. A formal notice to Marcus and my parents demanding that they retract their public statements and immediately cease any further attempts to sabotage my business. When Dana handed me the printed draft, the weight of the paper felt heavier than any check I'd ever written for them. "Once we send this," she said, "they'll know you're serious." I nodded, the knot in my chest tightening. Serious. It was a word my family had never believed about me. 2 evenings later, the storm they'd started finally came to my doorstep again. It was just after sunset when my phone buzzed with a text from Grandma Margaret, one I hadn't expected. "We need to talk. Please meet us. One last time." Beneath the words was the quiet plea of someone caught between loyalty and truth. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The diner she chose was an old, weathered spot on Colfax Avenue, a place where the smell of fried onions and strong coffee clung to the vinyl booths. I arrived early, the low hum of the neon sign outside flickering against the windows. When the door's bell finally jingled, they entered together. Dad, Mom, Marcus, and Grandma Margaret. Their arrival carried the weight of a final act. Dad slid into the booth across from me, his posture stiff, his expression a careful mask. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low, as though the chipped formica table could keep our words from spilling into the room. I folded my hands around the coffee cup and met his eyes. "I'm here." Mom spoke next, her tone softer than it had been in years. "Emily, we can move past this," she said, her fingers laced tightly together. "We're family. We don't want to lose you." The words might have carried weight once, but now they sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them in the car to sound like contrition. I set my cup down. "You didn't care about family when you shared Marcus's posts," I said quietly. Her face flushed, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Marcus leaned forward, his voice sharp. "You're making us look bad. You cut us off and now everyone thinks we're the problem." I tilted my head, almost amused. "Marcus, you called me selfish on Facebook. You tried to sabotage my business. Who exactly is making who look bad?" He looked away, jaw tight. Grandma Margaret reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm, her touch trembling. "Emily," she said gently, "family is about forgiveness. We've made mistakes, but we're here to fix this. Don't throw away what truly matters." Her eyes, lined with years of wisdom and worry, held a plea I hadn't expected. For a heartbeat, I felt the old pull of her kindness, the one person whose love had always seemed untainted. But then the memories came back in a rush, the name tag, the laughter, the $50,000 siphoned without gratitude, Marcus's whispered deals with my competitors. Grandma hadn't seen it all, but she'd heard their version of the story, one twisted to paint me as the villain. I pulled my hand back gently. "Family doesn't use each other," I said, my voice steady. "You all treated me like a bank, not a daughter. Not a sister." Dad's eyes narrowed. "You're being stubborn," he said, the sharpness creeping back into his tone. "We raised you. We gave you everything." A short, bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. "You raised me to pay your bills. I'm done being your safety net," Mom's voice cracked, rising. "You can't just walk away from us," she said. "We're your blood." I reached into my purse, pulled out a 20, and set it on the table beside the cooling coffee. "This is the last thing I'll cover," I said, my voice calm but final. "You've taken enough." Marcus opened his mouth. But I silenced him with a single look. Grandma's eyes filled with tears. But I couldn't stay, not for her, not for anyone. I stood, the bell above the diner door jingling as I stepped into the cool night air. The Denver skyline shimmered faintly in the distance, each light a quiet reminder that I was finally free of their weight. The night air outside the diner carried the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and distant pine, the kind of mountain breeze that always felt like a promise of change. I paused on the sidewalk, the glow of the flickering neon sign washing the pavement in soft red and blue. Behind me, the bell over the door jingled again, but I didn't turn. Their voices, raised and frantic, muffled by the diner's glass, were no longer mine to carry. I walked to my car without looking back. Every step felt like reclaiming something that had been quietly stolen for years. The air was sharp and cool against my skin, a silent applause that only I could hear. Driving through downtown Denver, I let the city's lights blur past like streaks of gold. For the first time in years, my chest felt unbound. No late-night calls demanding money. No careful budgeting to cover someone else's crisis. Just the hum of my car and the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Yet freedom has a strange quiet, an emptiness that asks what comes next. When I reached my apartment, the silence inside was almost startling. The faint aroma of the morning's coffee lingered in the air. I set my purse on the counter and stood for a long moment, staring at the small details of my home. the watercolor skyline I'd painted during one sleepless weekend, the stack of client briefs on my desk, the plant leaning toward the window's dim city glow. This was my world now, unshared, undemanded. In the days that followed, that silence became something deeper than peace. It became space. Space to think, to plan, to build without the constant tug of guilt. My agency, newly fortified with legal protections and a sharpened reputation, began to flourish. Clients who had hesitated before were now eager to sign. The campaign Marcus had tried to sabotage not only survived, but won the attention of a national brand. I spent my mornings at the agency's downtown office, a sunlit loft where creativity thrived. We sketched ideas on whiteboards streaked with color, debated strategies over cups of dark roast, and celebrated each new contract with quiet pride. For once, I wasn't balancing my success against someone else's demands. Monica became my anchor in those weeks. We met for coffee every Saturday at a small cafe tucked into an old brick building near Union Station. Her laughter, bright, unguarded, reminded me of what real support looked like. She never asked for anything except my time. "You're stronger for this," she told me one morning as we watched the light slant through the cafe's tall windows. "Not because you had to be, but because you chose to be." I believed her. Still, the echoes of family lingered. I heard about them in fragments, carried to me through mutual acquaintances and the casual whispers of a city that loved its gossip. Marcus had lost his job. His debts, the ones he had hidden behind my generosity, had finally caught up with him. He'd been let go after missing too many days chasing the mirage of quick investments. When I first heard, a dull ache stirred. But it wasn't guilt. It was the quiet weight of knowing I had been right to walk away. Mom and Dad faced their own reckoning. Without my steady stream of support, the comfortable life they had built on my earnings began to crumble. The mortgage payments slipped through their fingers. The luxury they'd treated as their birthright turned fragile. Within months, they lost the house I'd once helped them save. They moved into a modest rental on the outskirts of the city, their world shrinking to fit their reality. I didn't rejoice, but neither did I mourn. Their struggle was not a punishment I wished on them. It was the inevitable truth they had tried to avoid. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, the phone buzzed. A message from Grandma Margaret lit the screen. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't see how much they took from you." Her words were simple, almost hesitant. I stared at them for a long time, the city's twilight folding around me. My thumb hovered over the reply button. Her voice at the diner, soft, pleading, echoed in my mind. She had believed family was about forgiveness, about mending what others had broken. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. I set the phone down without replying. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The weeks turned into months. My days filled with work and quiet victories. I found joy in the small things. Early morning walks along the Cherry Creek Trail, late-night brainstorming sessions with my team. The simple pleasure of coming home to a space that belonged entirely to me. The agency's success grew beyond anything I'd once imagined. The campaign Marcus had tried to sabotage became a national success, earning industry recognition and new clients who trusted my vision. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I stood in my office as the last of the sun spilled across the Denver skyline. The glass towers glowed like embers, and for the first time in years, I felt something like contentment settle over me. I thought about the girl who had once believed that family meant sacrifice without question. The woman who had written check after check hoping love would follow. That, a different kind of family. One built not from blood, but from choice. In the months after that diner meeting, the life I carved out began to feel like something solid, something earned. The agency thrived with a steadiness that made every late night and every hard decision worth it. We landed a national retailer as a flagship client, work that demanded long hours and bold ideas. The campaign Marcus once tried to leak became the centerpiece of their rebranding, a success that rippled through industry magazines and professional networks. But beyond the headlines and contracts, It was the quieter victories that mattered more. My mornings were my own now. I woke before dawn, brewed coffee, and watched the first light settle over the Denver skyline from my balcony. Some days I'd sketch in the small leather notebook I carried everywhere, tiny bursts of color and words that had nothing to do with work. Just fragments of the person I was becoming. Monica remained a constant presence. Our weekly coffee meetups stretched into late brunches, her laughter softening the edges of my solitude. She never asked about my family unless I chose to speak. And when I did, she listened without judgment, offering the kind of quiet understanding that asked for nothing in return. "You know," she said one Saturday, swirling her spoon in a half-finished latte, "sometimes we're born into families that can't see us. That doesn't mean we stop deserving love. It just means we build it differently." I held her words close, letting them settle like small stones in a riverbed. Grandma Margaret sent a few more messages in those first months. Each one was brief, careful, thinking of you. "I hope you're well. I'm sorry for what you went through." I read them all, but answered none. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't yet know how to bridge the gap between compassion and self-preservation. Meanwhile, news of my parents and Marcus reached me in scattered pieces, like distant echoes of a storm I had already survived. Marcus, burdened by the debts he once hid behind my generosity, burned through his remaining savings chasing bad investments. Mutual acquaintances whispered about collectors calling, about doors he no longer answered. Eventually, he moved out of the apartment I had once paid for, crashing on a friend's couch with no clear plan. Mom and Dad's decline was slower but no less certain. Without the quiet flow of my financial support, their carefully curated life unraveled. The house they once filled with dinner parties and easy laughter slipped beyond their means. I heard they'd sold most of the furniture before finally moving into a modest rental on the city's outskirts, a beige duplex without the sweeping mountain view they used to brag about. I felt no triumph in their fall. What I felt was harder to name, a clean, quiet recognition that consequences had finally arrived. Occasionally, when the evening light caught the edge of a certain memory, Dad's voice calling me his little investor, Mom's practiced smile as she pocketed my checks, I would feel the sting of what we'd lost. But then I would remember the limited guest tag, the laughter in that glittering ballroom, and the slow, calculated way they drained me for years. Those memories did not fade. They sharpened into a lesson. As the seasons turned, the agency became more than just a business. It became a testament to the life I was building on my own terms. We expanded into a larger office near Union Station, a space filled with natural light and the quiet energy of people who believed in the work. My team grew from 5 to 12, each new hire bringing fresh ideas and an energy that reminded me why I'd started this journey in the first place. On the night we signed our biggest client to date, Monica joined me and the team for a small celebration. We toasted with sparkling cider and cheap champagne, laughter spilling across the office as the city lights shimmered through the windows. "You did this," Monica said, raising her glass toward me. For a long time, I would have deflected the credit, softened it with a joke. But that night, I simply smiled and said, "We did this." Later, when the office had emptied and only the quiet hum of the city remained, I stood at the window overlooking the dark ribbon of the Platte River. The reflections of streetlights shimmered on the water, shifting and alive. It struck me then that freedom isn't a single moment or a grand gesture. It's a series of small, stubborn choices, a decision every day to protect what you've built, to believe you are worth the boundaries you set. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who sent money in the middle of the night, who believed every sacrifice might finally buy her a seat at the table. She had been brave in her own way, but she had been blind, too. Now, standing in the quiet glow of my own success, I understood that love without respect is only dependence in disguise. I had lost the family I once clung to, but in their absence I found something stronger, my own voice, my own worth, and the unshakable truth that I could choose who belonged in my life, and that, at last, was enough. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. And tell us in the comments which country and city you're tuning in from. We'd love to know where our viewers are watching.